Hi guys, so I'm here to do a voice narration of the Sunday tournaments I played on the 17th of March. I was originally going to run it as a live series. However, it just got to the point where I was playing too many tables and trying to keep a main focus on 6 tables on the main screen was too difficult, as I had too many tables off screen. My focus was too stretched. So I decided instead that I'd go back over the footage the next day and talk about the interesting spots, so we can fast forward at any periods of dull action and sort of sink our teeth fully into the more interesting areas that come up. So just talk about the tables quickly. We have the going to do table 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 from top to bottom. So table 1 is the bigger 109. Table 2 is the Sunday Million. Table 3 is the Sunday 100 rebuy. Table 4 is the bigger 55. Table 5 is the 33 rebuy. Table 6 is the T-Rex, which is a 163 threes out on full tilt. Table 7 is the Party Mage, I believe. Table 8 is the Hot 75, and Table 9 is the F-Tops Event 2. So we get it first hand in the T-Rex. We open 10s on the button, on the cutoff, sorry, and Centipede peels in the big blind. Get a pretty meh flop for our hand. You could probably argue putting this into your thin value range on the flop. However, I don't think it's essential. I think I'm pretty happy to check back and not get barreled as a bluff all that often, if not ever. And then obviously on the river, we don't really rep many bluffs, but it's a situation where we've just made a post, so going to squeeze out any value from any part of his range that we feel like we can. I think he could possibly have a hand like just any sort of random ace X that he's decided to defend the big blind with, although I do perceive that to probably fold the river some of the time, but maybe not. It depends how he views me. So going to swap some tables in and out here. Got rid of the Party Major for the GSOP 500 freeze out. It's my first Sunday back on Euro sites, so it was all a bit interesting playing around with whatever 15 tables of different software sites. Hope everything is visually clear enough. So table 8 here in the Hot 75. Apologies for the slight overlap on tables. It seemed best to keep the action at 9 tables rather than 6. More to talk about, etc. We opened 6-9 suited in sort of mid position, and the big blind defends, check calls on King Jack 8, 2 diamonds, and jams a 2.5x pot on a 5 of hearts turn. Pretty much just think his range is King X, and he's just paranoid about the amount of draws are out there, and me having initiative. So he earned himself the sort of slightly retarded label here. In the 33 rebuy, pretty decent 3-bet spot. I typically have fairly wide 3-bet ranges in later position play, as equally as I mix in more unconventional 3-bets versus early position raises, depending on opening frequencies of players and the such like. You'll see me open pretty much 100% of buttons when stacks are deep throughout the entire video. That's a style I play. I think it's very effective. I don't think people defend the blinds anywhere near enough, play back at you enough, and whether that's through flatting or free betting or free bet 4 betting, whatever the action goes, I think they're defending distinctly less than 40% of the time to a min open. So if that's the case, you pretty much mathematically you have a profitable open with 7-2 offsuit every single time. If they are defending less than 40% to a min open, which I think is pretty much always going to be the case. Obviously, table 3 when RDCRSN jams 20 bigs. I don't think we're not getting anywhere near the right price to call off with our 10-9 suited. I could consider free betting small table 1 in the big 109 with the Jack 5 suited against Dimitri, but he tends to 4-bet jam a lot against my 3-bets. I don't know if he thinks I'm really wide or whatever, but that's my typical experience. That's my history with him. He's not getting a lot of credit most of the time. So while there's no particular theme to this video, I did want to focus somewhat on early game play, and building stacks and um, maximizing your EV in the earlier stages of tournaments when stacks are deeper, and people generally play more passive and more leaky. So obviously easier to have more costly leaks, even though in terms of like total chips they're going to cost you less. But in terms of big blinds, leaks tend to be biggest when stacks are deepest, which is a pretty big error, especially when several times in the year biggest prizes of the year revolve around deep stack series. So it is an area that I tend to touch on when I go through coaching, both individually and when I do video series. I think it's a worthwhile topic to discuss and talk about how we can build stacks earlier, set ourselves up with an image, and generally pound on relatively weak aggression factors in the early stages of tournaments. Table 5 here, pretty happy to peel the King Jack off multi-way. Hopefully flop something sweet. Table 3, when the hijack opens, I think this is a reasonably close spot between 3-betting and peeling. I think if I had a suited Broadway, I'd be much more likely to peel, and I'd also probably be more likely to peel if he'd opened the cutoff. I think just his opening range is slightly stronger here, and I also think it's significant that I think he's going to play fairly obviously to a 3-bet, i.e. I think he's going to just go ahead and 4-bet most of his strong range, so I don't think I really have to worry about, I don't have to worry about him peeling with a stronger range pre-flop. Here in table 4, I basically just have all sets in my range, and I think raising is a better option than peeling with the Queen 10 suited, big 55. He just folds all of his high cards, and I think he's going to fold hands like 6x by the turn almost always. Even though that obviously blocks our plausible combos of sets, I still think that's the case. Table 6 against Overman's pretty happy check call on the flop. I think he's on the nittier side, so turn would be close, even though this would be a card I perceive a good player to frequently barrel. Although I do think it's a card that if you fire on, like from his perspective, if he's firing on this turn, I do think he should be firing on all rivers as well. I think just barreling this turn as an individual barrel is going to be pretty leaky against a good player. I don't think we can get any value on in the river. And table 2 is quite an interesting hand. Goes multi-way with 9s and gets led into by, I don't believe this was the pre-flop raiser. Debating between whether calling and raising is the best option. I felt like raising accomplished two things. One, I think it gets the most absolute value out of his hand on this street. I think when we're going to get value, it's going to be on this street particularly. I don't think he leads 180 with 8x hands. So I think it also allows us to control the rest of the hand on the turn and river, which is a pretty vital thing. I just think, as I say, I think his 5x range is going to peel this flop, but check down and check and fold on a lot of bad turns for him. So I think we maximize our value by raising the flop, and when he checks turn and river, I don't think it's a spot where I'm pretty sure we're ahead of his hand, but I can't envisage him calling with worse once the board runs out that way. I'm just waiting on a spot here. It was an interesting experience for me playing on a lot of Euro sites after so long, getting used to dodgy software again, and playing on Party for the first time. Considering I didn't have a note on a single person, it was a pretty interesting experience. Pretty standard open with the 6s in the GSOP 500. Free Xing would be absolutely fine. I just, habitually open to 2.5x when stacks are over 100 big blinds deep, and then min raise when stacks are under 100. It's just something I do from cash games, especially because I'm used to people sort of free betting and four betting with a higher frequency. I think I could potentially adapt my opening sizing depending on whether that was the case or not. And obviously, the less people are free betting and four betting, the happier I am to sort of open with a slightly larger size, and even be really sort of unbalanced about it. And at tables that aren't paying attention, open more with my value hands, especially in early position. I think you can get away with it, and open less with your steals. But I haven't really done any thinking into that, and I'm not sure how effective or obvious that would be. But yeah, my general strategy is to it's 2.5x if I'm over 100 blinds deep. Flop decision here in the GSOP, four-way on 7-5-9 two clubs. We have sixes. I don't really think. I think check folding is just the best option. Again, I know Euro games play a lot sort of softer and a lot more passive, so you could probably get away with c betting, getting peeled by a lot of draws that you'd expect to be raised. So therefore you get blown off your equity, even though our equity is fairly minimal, than you would if you were playing a similar tournament on stars or full tilt. However, I think check folding is a pretty fine option. Unfortunately, we did pretty much turn our gin card, but kind of irrelevant. Open the Queen 6 suited here, table 8 in the hot 75 from what looks like the hijack, and get a decent flop against a short stacker who decided to peel with 10 big blinds pre-flop. So there's not much to really talk about there. Table 4, the big 55, get 3 bet, just over 3x. By a guy that I don't have many reads on. Typically, he was playing a lot of lower stakes stuff, so I just felt fold would be better, just because I think typically he'd have a shallower, a smaller bluffing range, and considering he was free betting under the gun raise, I just expected his value range to be absolutely crushing me, and I don't think I was getting the correct implied odds to peel when he makes it so big. Table 3 in the 100 rebuy, I typically wouldn't peel here against an under the gun open, just because implied odds, reverse implied odds are a factor, and I just think my hand plays so poorly against this under the gun range that I'm going to end up check folding far too often. I think I considered defending it against mid position or later, depending on how weak I felt the opponent was. Against that particular player, I would more than likely peel, as I seem to have a bad note. A note on him that he's somewhat bad. Yeah. I think peeling is something that you can certainly overdo and underdo, and I think you should weigh up how often you're peeling depending on both position, the position you're defending against, the open from, your actual hand equity post flop, and whether you're facing a type of opponent who plays tricky and plays aggressively and likes to fire multiple barrels and stuff. Obviously, all those factors make your pre-flop peel less profitable. So you want to be targeting people who, are barreling very infrequently, open a range that your hand does okay against. Pretty obvious factors I'm sure you guys are well aware of. In the table 8, the hot 75, so we open the 4s and get a fairly meh flop for our hand. This is just a spot where I think just putting our exact hand in our sort of just bet once and give up range is an okay play, and therefore I choose to make my sizing quite a bit smaller than usual, simply because on that particular board I feel like he's either folding, he's folding the same range to a 300 chip bet that he is to a 450 or a 500 chip bet. And considering, my hand has no sort of multi-street barreling equity, it seems like the best option is just, set yourself a size that charges yourself the best price on your single barrel. Here in the 100 rebuy, top right hand against Andy McLeod, I would be firing. I'd just be tripling off here on this texture if he check calls. I think it's a spot where kings aren't in his range, nines might not be in his range, but they could be. So we'll give him like 50% of combos of 9x, 5x, king 9, and then a ton of draws, all of which I expect him to check raise, considering we don't block any flush draws when we block some queen x combos. But yeah, I think it's just a spot where a lot of MTT regs will turn their ranges face up by sort of check calling on that type of board. So it's always a spot where I'm going to be happy tripling when I got a decent value range myself. Obviously, going to be sort of tripling with king jack plus for value, and obviously all my many draws and gutters on that board that are going to feel comfortable tripling. Until we build up a dynamic where he knows that I'm going to be tripling wide, both for value and as a bluff, and therefore keep stronger hands in his check calling range. But I don't think typically many people bother to do that. So I think at least initially it's a good spot that you can take advantage of against against regs who plays not ABC but play a certain distinct style. Here with the tens, I think I missed the proof of action. I think it was I opened. Table 1, I'm talking here, sorry. Table 1, I opened, got min 3 bet, and a short stack went all in from the big blind. Check, flop goes check, check, and we win a nothing side pot. Yeah, not much to talk about there. I think there's I think towards sort of the second hour of the footage, there's a period where we bust quite a lot of tables from having a period of run bad, but I think they've always got about 4 or 5 on the second screen, so I think we don't lose any screen space, so the action should keep flowing the entire way through. Table 9 here in the F-tops, I think typically I free bet most of my continuing range from the small blind. However, I think with our exact hand for these positions, I don't think peeling is a bad option. It might even be the best option. Obviously going to be check folding this flop, especially 3 ways. So table 6, we open the ace jack suited under the gun, get a defender from the big blind, pretty standard value bet on jack 10, 5, 2 clubs. Against the raise, I've been tending to peel most likely and proceed on sort of a variety of turns depending on bet sizing, what the turn was, etc. Again, pretty obvious turn barrel for value when we turn hearts. Against the Sun a Million against Jean Grey, pretty standard peel, blind versus blind with the jack 9 suited. You could certainly make a case for 3 betting. I don't know if he knows that I'm a high stakes reg or whatever, mid to high stakes reg or not. I certainly don't think we've played that much together, probably 200 hands or so. So I went on the assumption that he would probably just think I was, a Sunday player playing a fairly high stakes schedule, and just go ahead and see bet the majority of his range on this particular board and shut down on quite a few turns. So I appeared with that in mind, and the fact that obviously we have backdoor clubs, but more for the fact that I think he's going to shut down a fair amount, and we can just take the pot away, and we can also just sort of, I'm not sure if he'd bet king x or 10x on the flop or just check call, but either way I think sort of the pairs that he has in his range that he does bet will probably fold by the river if we do barrel off, which is my intention here, considering we have a good variety of good good number of ace-x hands in our range, and obviously Jack Queen as well. Although you could argue we'd raise the flop just to build the pot. He check calls a turn, and I expect him to probably check call the turn with sort of like weak ace x, king x, and fold sort of hands weaker than ace jack by the river. So sort of all king queen, king jack type hands, and any sort of like ace 5 type hands he has, I'm pretty sure he would fold as well. So that's my intention with this river bet. He does end up having a hand. He does actually end up doing something that I think he should and is good to do if he's checking a lot of his marginal hands and not bluffing this run out that much, which is check the turn with a stronger portion of his range, get me to barrel off, which I think I like, which I do like if his intention is to not bluff that run out very often. So kind of he played well against me there. Obviously difficult to say whether he did it just to sort of keep the pot small, which he obviously didn't accomplish, but whether he did that to sort of attempt a pot control or whether he did that to trap me, whatever. I think that's a good play on his behalf. I decided to fold the fives and the f-tops bottom right pre-ante. Kind of one of the annoying facts about tilt tournaments, the antes don't tend to kick in until 122.40. I think at a relatively short table, opening fives with whatever just under 30 bigs is it's okay. I would do it sometimes, but I think it's, from memory, it's quite a reasonably tough table. So table 6 in the T-Rex, pretty comfortable squeeze spot when we're playing whatever 125 big blinds deep. I think flatting is a fine option. I just personally prefer to 3-bet a lot more as a general game plan. I think because I also think that people in tournaments, especially in the early stages, tend to peel with a fairly face-up range and just sort of 4-bet more air-heavy hands, more raggy hands rather, and their nuts. So you can define their range somewhat on some textures. So I prefer to do it for those reasons as well. We get a decent flop for our exact hand, obviously. Not sure whether we'd get 3 streets of value against his peeling range. So my plan would probably be to bet check many turns, check quite a lot of turns, and then fire for value on some rivers, depending on the river and how I felt he'd play sort of flush draws on the flop and that sort of thing. He does end up and fold. Top right in the Sunday rebuy, make a sort of an unconventional 3-bet, which I think is good to do from time to time against Champs du Pré. Sort of against his early position open, we 3-bet from mid position with 7-9 suited, with kind of a reasonably shallow stack, 30 big blinds. I think it's going to be an effective play against someone who doesn't know much about me, have absolutely no history, never really played against each other before. So I expect him to think my range for the most part is going to be on the stronger side. So I expect to get 4-bet bluffed very infrequently, and I don't expect him to peel too light, peel with hands that we do okay against anyway. He does end up snap jamming, so I just think his range for getting it in there is probably like tens ace queen plus. Can't do much about that, but I think the spot in general's a pretty good one. Big one, a 9 top left, table 1, open aces under the gun and get squeezed by pretty aggressive looking reg. I don't know if he's a reg, but aggressive looking player running 25-22 over a small sample. So about the tables popping up, I think we end up bringing this under 500 in a second. It makes a fairly sizable squeeze given my opening stack. I think a better size for him to go with his entire range is more sort of like 1200. Just to give the illusion that he can squeeze and fold to a jam. But we do jam and he does have ace-9 off, so he's just clearly just a huge fish. So we're bringing this under 500, and we actually end up having a really interesting table because we have J Master who plays really nitty the entire time, but we have some huge whales to our right. I think Dragon Warrior, Jostle, Milton and Stato all end up being fairly large fish. So I think we get into some interesting pots and some pretty big pots early on. So I think it's a good thing that I brought it in to watch and to look at. So I open the table 4, big 55, we open ace jack off and get 3-bet by a 20 big blind stack, 30 big blind stack on the larger side. Oh, sorry, no, I'm misreading stacks there. Sorry, stacks are 60 big blinds deep, so I think peel or 4-bets are both fine options. I think I'd advocate more for a peel here, just because, you know, people don't tend to play that great post flop, so I think peeling is a fine option. Here in the f-tops, table 9, pretty easy jam, 3-bet jam, button versus small blind. I think he's going to have a decent 3-bet bluffing range there, especially when he's running 25-16. So in the big 55, we check with the intention of pretty much check folding, simply because I think in mtts this is sort of a board texture that doesn't get fired on once all that often. I think he's probably intending to fire off, or if he's checking the turn, it's with a hand that, you know, has enough showdown value that he's happy to sort of go with it. And his 3-betting ranges should be pretty strong in those positions in general. So I think happy with the check fold and the flop. In terms of what I'm looking for when I peel the 3-bet with that particular hand, because it kind of, you know, it's not a great hand to play out of position with, you know, reasonably deep stacks. Is it like flops that I feel like I can, you know, comfortably check raise bluff or check peel as a bluff, and, you know, get them to fold pairs that are better than mine, ace sides are better than mine. So it's under 500 here. It's the first time we have against the fish. 3-bet the ace king off purely for value. Sizing wise, you know, you could argue for even bigger, but I think as long as you're going sort of 3x or slightly over at this stack depth, it's absolutely fine. With the 9-10 here in the hot 75, I think 18 big blinds deep, the best play is going to be to limp and maximise. I think that maximises our equity. I think it's probably just about not. I don't think it's quite an open jam, and I think limping is a better play than min raising. Unfortunately, we get a slightly awkward flop for our hand, because even though we may raise, even though we may limp some ace-x hands, I don't think he's going to perceive that to be the case. Okay, so in the under 500, this guy double min bets or bets whatever, like 14% of the pot or something. So we just decide to go ahead and raise just to get him to fold, you know, any random gut shot that he has, you know, that we don't particularly want to give a completely free card to. When he bets 80 again on this turn, I think I'm literally just intending to call this turn, you know, to mine for an ace or a king. You know, we still could have the best hand sometimes against some completely random gut shot draw or super weak flush draw or something like that. You know, and I just expect him to be doing something dumb some of the time. And now when he just goes so small in the river, I'm getting 10-1. I just literally want to see his hand. You know, I don't think I'm going to be that good that often. He might just have a 5, but I think he'd go bigger with anything other than the 5. So, you know, he still could have some random gut shots and stuff. But yeah, in this instance, he does end up having a random sort of low flush draw. So it's, you know, pretty much just an information call on the river, getting such an amazing price. And sort of note for future hands that we can be super wide on all streets with our raising range of value against that particular player. Top left in the bigger 109, kind of make an interesting peel here. I raise the cutoff pre, he defends the big blind, and he check raises kind of small on 6-6-4 2 diamonds. I kind of think this is just a board that he's going to take a random stab at with a check raise some of the time, and I think, you know, we keep more hands in our range that aren't draws by check calling. I think, especially even though we turn a flush draw there, I don't think we have enough, the stacks aren't deep enough to realise our equity. And when he fires on that, on a turn like an ace, which I think he might perceive me to make some sort of loose random peels with ace-x hands, I think he's going to check, you know, his air. So my intention with the peel, the flop peel, is just to, you know, I think it's a board that he's going to randomly check min raise some of the time and then give up on a lot of turns. Not really, you know, concentrating on the fact that I have one or two sets of backdoors myself. More for the fact that I just think it's a board that, you know, gets check raised and then frequently gets given up on. Obviously to see a very standard jam over the min open from Lake in the 33 rebuy, table 5. Got some tables, I think I got about 5 tables off screen as well, so I probably make a few mistakes, and if so I can talk about what I would have changed in my decision making. Obviously it's difficult to play 100% perfectly across 15 tables on multiple sites. I actually think it's a lot easier to, I don't think it's a pretty standard thing, but it's probably a lot easier to play more tables across just one site, because obviously you lose out a lot of value, especially on a Sunday doing that. So we bring back in the GSOT 500 freeze out, of which we have a decent early stack, although I think it starts very deep anyway, so it's kind of somewhat irrelevant. In the F-top spot, table 9, we defend looks like we defend and under the gun +1 open, with ace-4 suited. I think that was the pre-flop action. I could be wrong, but that does seem like what's happened. And we flop backdoor flush draw and a gut shot on a 2-heart board. I see why we flashed. Yeah, it's just a 3-way. It's a 3-way pot, and it goes kind of small. But when the pot goes multi-way, I don't think without hitting specifically a 5 or a spade on the turn, I don't think, and even if we hit a spade on the turn, the stack's kind of awkward in that we have a kind of a close turn decision whether we're not sure if we have, we probably end up having to check jam against a double barrel range, which is pretty strong. So I think it's a fine decision to fold the flop. Yeah, because I think check calling turn when the turn comes like the turn that it does. So I think it's a pretty close decision. It might even be bad considering I'm not sure we get our stack in 100% of the time on the river, and obviously we're going to be check folding on all river bricks pretty much. So it seems like a pretty bad situation in general, which can be pretty much solved by check folding the flop. In the big 55, I think if the opener had 3x'd it, or obviously 2x'd it, I would have been fine with a 3-bet, and I probably would 3-bet a decent chunk of the time. But when he 4x's, it's just a bit of an awkward situation. Even though obviously we win more when our 3-bet's successful, it has to work more often. And if he does peel, which I assume he's going to do more often than usual when he 4x's to a 3-bet. Anyway, let's just talk about this table 9 hand. Kind of a semi-awkward situation where I pretty much wanted to fold, where a 25 big blind stack squeezes to a committing amount, even though the open and the flatter to sort of an aggressive opener and a sort of a fishy flatter. I still think his range for doing this rather than jamming is going to be pretty much as queens, kings and aces. I can't really see him doing this with ace queen or ace king. It's possible that he does it with tens of jacks, but I think for the most part his range is just going to be maybe you could include ace king suited in his sort of squeeze range here. It's not a jam, but I think for the most part he's going to have, okay, he didn't have having jacks, but yeah, I think that's probably, he might do it with tens as well, but yeah, I basically think it's not going to be ace king and ace queen all that often, so it's going to be a high pair heavy range that we don't do great against. Missed the action pre in the Sunday million. It looks like we either defend and open. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about it because I actually completely missed the action. So we table 9, we replaced the F-tops. This is a multi-entry tournament, so just bring up another one. We start this entry with 30 big blinds. Down to about 20 big blinds now on the Sunday rebuy. Just haven't had many spots, and the table's been quite deep stacked, fairly tough and aggressive. Not necessarily tough, but certainly aggressive. So I haven't been that many spots for us to get involved in. Could argue for a 3-bet with the king 9 off. I think I certainly would if antes were in play more often than not. And the other thing that's we've got going for us there is that we've obviously been playing like an absolute nit over 54 hands. I certainly would 3-bet king 10 off. I think king 9 off is kind of thin. King 9 suited, I'd certainly 3-bet. And I think if antes were in play again, I'd probably lean towards 3-betting. Table 4, big 55, get 3-bet 3x by Agent Bear, who's like a tight, straightforward mid to low stakes regular from the small blind. When we don't have sufficient implied odds to peel, and I don't think we can peel for the value of him, firing once and giving up, because stacks aren't deep enough, and 2, I think his range is too strong in general. 3-betting from the small blind against an under the gun open, or under the gun +1 open. So yeah, I think it's pretty trivial fold, and I think if you're peeling in spots like that, it's 1, optimistic, and B, bad, unless you have a really specific read. The someone is, just has like an 100% C-bet range and 20% turn bet range, i.e., only betting the turn when he's got his all-in range, is getting in range rather. Sunday rebuy, table 3. Gonna peel. I would peel if folded to me with the 2s in the small blind, despite only having 20 bigs. I think you could. I don't know if you could argue for a jam here. I don't really know that much about Andy McLeod. I've only played 111 hands here. I think this is a spot where I would be tempted to jam against, a regular that I know would be really aggressive in this sort of stage of the tournament, and open a really wide range. So, I felt like I had unlimited fold equity, and obviously when the small blind peels as well, it's like the most trivial peel in the world. Got a few hands and spots here. In the T-Rex, table 6, I believe we double barrel this board. And something I've been noticing recently is I think you can triple on a lot of runouts really, really profitably, because people tend to check raise the turn with their value hands so often. People sort of, I don't know if it's because people get excited or scared of getting blown off their equity and scared of whatever bad rivers coming that either kill their action or improve my perceived range. But in general, I think, and I've noticed, I haven't played many NTC sessions since coming back full time, but it's something I've noticed a huge number of people doing, which is when you're the initial raiser, check raising turns after they sort of check call flops, and obviously it's a spot where they just are very rarely, if ever, having air in their range, and their check raising range is going to be so strong enough that it's going to be impossible to continue against if you have sort of weak showdown value, marginal showdown value, or bluffs. So in that case, when they do check call a turn, I think it's a great spot where we can triple, depending on board textures obviously, but a huge number of rivers, simply because, especially sort of like weaker regulars or more sort of standard regulars, I think it's a spot where too many people are sort of check raising turns and turning their hand face up. Not turning their hand face up, but revealing the strength of their range. Yeah. It seems like we had a few hands that's got us back to. Oh no, sorry. Ignore me. I was thinking we lost the first hand in the Sunday rebuy at the Sunday 500, but we didn't. We won it. Pretty easy jam with our last 7 big blinds in the hot 75, table 8. And this stack depth, with Jordan playing a million tables and not paying that much attention, and a fish in the big blind, or someone I think is sort of just a tight player, I'm not sure if he's a fish or not, I would open 100% of buttons, especially this stack depth. At this stack depth, pre-ante doesn't really bother me. The fact that there's no ante in play doesn't really. you know, if it's, you know, it seems like a trivial amount to win, but it's something that's going to just improve. It does a couple of things for you. Obviously, it increases the number of hands you're playing early, which gives you more action when you're sort of opening the stronger portion of your range in late position. And you know, it just also just, you know, gains you a few extra chips early on, which is obviously better than just not gaining them. So yeah. Sorry about the hard overlapping stack sizes and names on the GSOP table. I can't really avoid that. I haven't worked out a way because they lay out the table in such an awkward fashion. I can't really sort of figure out a way to not do that and to not hide my bet buttons at the same time. Okay, so in the Big 55, table 4, open ace queen, and get to defend from, looks like the big blind. Pretty easy c-bet on the king 9-4 rainbow. You know, we've got a lot of perceived king x in our range, and we can barrel him off some gut shots. So he check calls with 9x hands, that he check calls with, etc. A lot of turns that are going to be decent for our range, and you know, bad for his check calling range. I think table 8 there is probably pretty close to a jam, with 7 bigs from mid position with the ace-2 off. I think it's probably okay as a fold. Jean Grey limps table 2 in the million and fires on 8-5-5. I basically think he's going to be limping and firing on a lot of boards, and with our gut shot here I think the best plan is just to go ahead and raise. Obviously prefer if we had backdoor spades as well, but I think he's going to be lead folding often enough that we can just, you know, raise here and rep 5x plenty, and you know, 6, 7, 8x. So there's some turns that we can continue on, obviously, including a 7x, a 7 turn that makes us straight. In the f-tops here, I think calling behind is the only real option. Pre-ante without any real reads, since we've got moved to a fresh table when we've got our second entry up. I don't think jamming, well, I think jamming might be a little bit optimistic. In the bigger 109, table 1, defending against a hijack open, I think it's probably the weakest hand I would defend with, but I think it's just about okay against a 18 big blind stack, 17 big blind stack, whatever. Gets sorry, table 9 in the f-tops, when the original raiser fires into 4-5 players on queen 2, 3, 2 diamonds. I think calling is going to be really tricky and optimistic. I'm expecting to fire on a lot of turns, and I don't think it's a good situation for us to be calling, hoping him to check turns and rivers, because I don't think it's going to happen that often when he shows so much strength on the flop by firing into so many players. I think I was just checking. I don't think this is a good jam. If I were to jam there, it would have been a bad jam. I think I was just checking how close we are to the money. I'm guessing not all that close, considering I was considering a jam. Here in the Sunday Million, we get 3-bet relatively small by the big blind with a really low 3-bet percentage. So I think peeling is, I think it's close between a peel and a fold. I think given that he's not going to play overwhelmingly awesome post flop, I think peeling is okay. And against someone with a more aggressive 3-bet percentage, you know, even though it's not the best hand in the world to 4-bet, I'd probably be somewhat inclined to 4-bet if he was 4-bet folding a decent chunk of the time. Table 3 in the Sunday rebuy. I think this is a fairly comfortable jam. With 13 bigs. It might be slightly close. I mean, it might be king 9 suits, should be the bottom of my range for jamming here. But I think it's probably just about okay. I think only Andy McLeod is the only tricky, like particularly good reg behind it, and I don't know why people expect you to jam in those spots, but I wouldn't think that'd be sort of calling with hands like you know, queen 10 suited and stuff. which we're obviously okay against, but once those hands end up in someone's range, our equity against their general calling range diminishes quite quickly. Here in the GSOP, I think I missed the action pre, but I'm guessing it seems to be a 4-bet, I don't know, it's 3 or 4-bet pot. We continuation bet on 8-6-5, 2 hearts. This is a spot where against a reg I would check most of my range on the flop, if not all of my range. But against someone who doesn't really know me, I'm happy to just fire and hopefully get him to fold high cards and you know, some sort of 9 or 10x, not 9 pocket 9s, pocket 10s type hands by the turn or river if it does run out in a way that I feel comfortable tripling. Obviously now in the hot 75, in the cut-off 5 big blinds, 6 big blinds, really easy jam, 5 big blinds. Get a chop against the same head. So in the F-top 9 here, raise under the gun and go 3-way, including against the big blind, and the flop comes dry as high board. Kind of a close spot because we don't have a lot of stack maneuverability, and it would be a much easier situation if it's in a heads-up pot where the board is quite comfortably better for our range than their range. It gets a bit thin trying to sort of bet 3 ways. Especially when we're going to have to check fold so many turns or so often, because I expect our opponent's peeling ranges to be stronger in 3-way pots rather than 2-way pots, especially when I have a shorter stack and my c-betting range is probably expected to be slightly stronger, considering we're betting into I'm betting into 2 other people, and I've opened from under the gun 1. So when he fires turn relatively, well, I guess just pretty standard sizing. I think check folding is the only real option, unless you have specific information on the guy that he's sort of peeling 8s there, and then going to sort of bet to either protect or think he's betting for value on turn or whatever. In the T-Rex table 6, I don't particularly like my check on this board, considering there's King and 10 of diamonds. If it was King King 10, no, let me rephrase. If it was King King, sort of King King brick with brick lower than 8, i.e. completely absent of draws, I much prefer checking my entire range. However, when there's so many more draws present, I think betting is definitely a superior option. When all the draws brick, I don't think I'm expected to have that many draws in my range, as I'm pretty sure he would expect me to just see that the flop. However, obviously we want to raise value, and I think not much more to talk about other than we're going to raise to a sizing where he may think we could just be turning some misdraws into a bluff, or his range doesn't have to be particularly strong anyway, so we could just be attacking what we perceive to be a reasonably weak range, even though in reality we probably only have a raising range of value on that river, which is King X plus. But kind of he doesn't need to know that, and he probably won't know that. So, but yeah, I think the mistake in that hand is definitely. I think in general, boards that are sort of 10-10x and higher paired, it's a pretty good plan to not have a c-betting range in general. However, this should change when boards have a lot more draws, where pair boards have draws present, especially a pair board like King King 10, where we can have a lot of broadways in our free betting range. So I think that was certainly a flop mistake there to not be c-betting that board. Yeah, I think I mean maybe I think, but I'd like to think if time banks were auto, I'd have thought about the situation a bit more and gone for a bet. However, that may equally not be the case. I think I fast forward the break. Yeah, I do. So we can carry on going straight away. And we bring in the party high roller here. My first time I'm playing on Party. I think this particular Sunday was either my first time playing on Party or the second time I've ever played on Party. Certainly the first time I ever played on the Party High Roller. So I was pretty unfamiliar with any names and how people play on the software. I've played a bit more now. This is a couple of weeks later. I think in general, people, you can clearly distinguish the bad players, and I think I'm starting to recognise a few more screen names. So not as in the dark as I was a couple of weeks ago. The only player the two people I recognised on the table at the time, or the three people rather, were J Thaddeus, who I think is a randomly nitty, and then occasionally Sputard Reg, who I think was once upon a time a PokerStars Pro. He might still be, but I don't think he is. I think he got D-Team Pro'd. A Romeo Pro 3-3, who has the same screen name on all sites. Good high stakes reg, or okay high stakes reg. Vinky, again, kind of similar to J Thaddeus in that he's can be randomly tight and then also can be ridiculously spewy at times also. In the high roller here, we peel an under the gun open, 250 big blinds deep with 8-7 of clubs. I think I'll be peeling almost my entire range in this spot, so I don't really need to worry about having a perceived weak range in spots like this. As against under the gun against an under the gun opener, I'd probably be free betting an incredibly small number of hands, if not no hands at all. So yeah, pretty okay with just peeling my entire range here. In the Sunday 500, 3-bet Dragon Warrior with the Queen King suited. I think peeling is fine. As I mentioned before, I just like to have a more 3-bet heavy game. I'd certainly advocate 3-betting King Queen off. I think the only reason why a reason in favour of 3-betting here would just be that I think with J Master and Q behind, who might be a reg, gives them the potential to squeeze. And I'm not sure, I'm not totally aware of how wide they're squeezing and whether I can put in a squash range. That's a 4-bet, a back raise 4-bet, also called a squash range. I'm just I'm slightly too unfamiliar with those things. So here in this under 500, pretty standard C-bet on 2-3-6, 2 spades. I think most of his range is made up of sort of cards between 9 and king. So I think he folds quite often. I believe he sort of 3-bets, 4-bets ace king, ace king queens plus pre most of the time. So when we sort of get this turn, certainly betting for value against 9s, 8s through to jacks. I don't really expect him to have many worse queen x peels in his flop range, but I do think he has enough worse pairs. And it's also a good spot for my ranges in general to be tripling with Queen King for value here, because it does mean in future situations both he and the rest of the table are going to call me lighter, call my triples down lighter, and also my bluffs are going to get more credit because I have more hands in my value range, because I'm not sort of so limited in my value combos, because I'm not ace queen plus here. I can have technically have more hands of value, so therefore my bluff should get more credit because I'm perceived to be value betting with a wider range. He does unfortunately end up having sort of the one hand in his range that beats us, but I really do think that is the one hand in his range that beats us, as I think most tournament players will tend to look to build the pot with their sets on the turn at the latest. Quite a lot of people decide to check raise flop. I think his line is completely fine and standard there. I would play the hand pretty much exactly the same way, I think, although I would occasionally 4-bet pre, but I think it's fine without more information. Apologies if I've missed any hands sort of going over that one. So very next hand we 3-bet the ace king off. Top left here, the bigger one in 9, get a 3x blind versus blind from a really tight player, so I think it's a pretty fine fold. In the bigger 55 here, pretty easy sort of 3-bet squeeze spot like I'll be doing with a decently wide range, especially as I think Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro is quite an active player, even though the HUD stats suggest that's not the case. I think I played with quite a lot of him on different sites and he seems to be a relatively active player.
Hot 55, table 3, open under the gun with Queen 10 suited, and flop and open in straight draw with backdoor flush draw. Be looking to fire sort of about 55% of the bottom, 60% of the bottom, fire at least a couple of barrels. Turn is a pretty okay card for me to fire on again, even though he might expect me to barrel turn diamonds. So a couple of spots here. Going to free bet the Queen 8 suited in the Sunday Million against Jean Grey's button open. I expect him to open a wide percentage on the button. Big 55, we check after free betting on King Queen 9. I don't think it's a great board for our range, and I think betting doesn't really accomplish much. You could argue for a bet fold, but I think he's going to reveal the strength of his hand with his bet sizing anyway. So checking seems like a fine option. We end up peeling his turn bet in the hot 55 simply because I think I can rep diamonds on the river, and I can certainly rep Jack X on this river when he bets 80 chips, as I don't think he'd lead 80 chips ever with a Jack with 3 of a kind in this spot. And obviously we have plenty of Jack X in our range, so raise and take it down. With the aces in the big 55, I just think it's a spot where I don't have enough information, and his bet sizing is basically setting up a river jam. Well, that's the way it seems to me. I mean, he may well be sort of betting smaller for what he perceives to be sort of thin value / protection with hands that we beat. Be interested to hear your thoughts on comments like that. What you do against a random in a spot like that? Are you more keen on bet folding flop? Do you like check calling flop and check proceeding on the turn depending on sizing the specific turn card? Yeah, give me your thoughts on that sort of hand. Tell me what you think. It looks like we took down the free bet against Jean Grey's button open as well with the Queen 8 suited. If Agent Bear had sort of like 50 big blinds there, if we were both 50 big blinds effective in the big 55 table 4, I'd be fine with free betting from the small blind. I wouldn't ever be peeling fours from the small blind there, as I just don't think you ever win the pot often enough post, and I think you increase your equity quite significantly by free betting rather than peeling. And I think the particular pairs that I'd peel would be specifically 7s, 8s and 9s, and then probably free bet 10s plus to get it in for value. So I don't know what happened there. Top right hot 55 against the 3x from the button. I think folding's a fine option, especially as he seems sort of a more random spazzy player. If I miss any hands while I'm talking about a particular table, please feel free to sort of bookmark a time slot on the video, and I'll go back and look over the hand and answer any questions that you have on a hand that I may have missed while analysing another situation. It's bound to happen at some point. I think it's table 1 big 0-9, pretty fine still at a weaker table with King 10 off with 20 big blinds, 21 big blinds, and pretty trivial fold to the jam. I think my calling range against a jam there would be something like 8s plus, ace queen plus, in a readless state like we are, with only 16 hands on the guy. Table 2, obvious open with the King 10 suited. Had Jean Grey come in for an open, I would have free bet rather than peeled. I think hand's a little bit too weak to peel, and I just expect me to free bet the stronger parts of my range, so it keeps my range protected and uncapped and nutted, etc. Any word you wish to describe it. Hot 55 against the 30 big blind under the gun +1 open. I don't think free bet calling is too wide here. It may be against a random, but that would be my default in a spot like this. I can't imagine free bet calling 30 big blinds from these positions is ever going to be a massive mistake, especially if he's peeling some and check folding, a decent number of boards. As I expect his sort of peeling range to be made up with hands of, hands that are significantly weaker than ours, and often we're going to get in situations where if you flop a pair, we're going to be facing a range that we dominate. On this particular board, I'm not in love with the board texture, and I think checking's a pretty good option considering we have the ace of diamonds, and we can sort of semi-free roll, see if we can pick up some equity on the turn, which we're comfortable sort of either betting on or calling a bet on. I think without the ace of diamonds, I'll be more inclined to just sort of c-bet, considering our queen blocks some of his potential gut shot combos and jack x combos that he may decide to just like check jam, considering stack sizes or whatever. Once he checks a turn, I think checking to check down is a reasonable option, as we still beat some sort of random hands, sort of random Broadway hands that he has, and I don't think he's going to fold hands like he has, even if we bet turn plus river, when they sort of fall, when the cards fall lower than a jack, as they did. Hi guys, we've got about an hour of footage left, which brings this to a pretty good point to pause and turn this into a two-part video, considering we've just done over an hour. So I'll pause this and upload the file, and then come back with part two. Okay, cheers, bye.